For 7 years, she was a ghost, a whisper of inadequacy in a kingdom obsessed with frigid perfection. They called her the weakest acolyte in the Order of the Serene Glacier, fit only for scrubbing floors. But the truth? The truth was, Elara harbored a secret that should have died out a century ago. She was the last of the legendary Phoenix blood mages. And the moment her arrogant bully forced her to prove her weakness, Elara knew her disguise was over. Because the pathetic water spark she was meant to conjure wouldn't come. Instead, she was forced to ignite the forbidden, spectacular fire of a mythical phoenix, and the only man witnessing it was Grand Inquisitor Kael, the highest authority in the realm, who has dedicated his life to executing all threats. Welcome back, my channel subscribers. You know we love a good hidden power fantasy. If you're new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to join us as we explore the best fantasy tales. Stick around until the end, because you have to see how Elara's single act of fiery defiance doesn't just save her life. It forces a Grand Inquisitor to kneel, reclaims a lost throne, and rewrites the destiny of an entire frozen kingdom. Let's dive into Chapter 1. The air in the Order of the Serene Glacier was always thin and brittle, smelling of ozone and purified ice. It was a cold that didn't just chill the skin, but seemed to seep into the very bone, perfect for the water mages who ruled here. For Elara, this cold was her constant, suffocating blanket. Her current penance, scrubbing the icy flagstones in the west dormitory corridor, a task traditionally reserved for the novices who were still physically incapable of elemental magic. She moved with exaggerated clumsiness, her small bucket of frigid water sloshing with practiced ineptitude. Every minute detail of her existence, the nervous glance when an acolyte passed, the way she shuffled instead of walked, was a performance of utter, spiritless exhaustion. It had kept her alive for 7 years. A shadow fell over the ice. It wasn't cast by the low winter sun, but by Sister Lyra. Lyra, with her polished silver hair and robe so pristine it seemed woven from solid frost, never bothered to look at Elara directly. Her cruelty was a calculated form of disdain. "A rather slow effort today, acolyte Elara." Lyra's voice sliced the silence, refined and utterly devoid of warmth. "It's been an hour, and you've managed barely 4 square stones. Even the novice class moves faster when charting glacial runoff. Surely your hands aren't too weak for a simple rag." Elara mumbled a barely audible, "Forgive me, sister, I apologize for my weakness." Lyra sighed, a sound of profound disappointment that was more wounding than a scream. She then performed her signature move. She held out a silver chalice of water, summoned from the nearest icicle with a casual wrist flick of magic. It shimmered with cold power, the very type of water Elara's phoenix blood instinctively rejected. "The Inquisitor arrives tomorrow," Lyra said, pouring a fine stream of the magically charged water directly onto Elara's freshly scrubbed section of floor. The water immediately began to crystallize into delicate, sharp spikes. "Ensure this area is dry before the morning bell. I wouldn't want our honored guest to slip on your incompetence." The cold water soaking her thin tunic felt like a physical assault, a mocking reminder that while she carried the power to turn the entire temple to ash, she couldn't even keep a small patch of floor dry. The phoenix in her blood screamed, but Elara pressed it down, swallowing the bitter taste of humiliation. Survival demanded she endure the mockery. Survival demanded she remain the pathetic ghost, praying the 7 years of performance were enough to keep her hidden one more day. But tomorrow, the Grand Inquisitor Kael arrived, and tomorrow her luck might finally run out. The atmosphere in the Order had curdled into a palpable collective anxiety. The mundane routine of the Serene Glacier was shattered by the impending arrival of one man, Grand Inquisitor Kael. Every surface was scrubbed to a mirror sheen, every ritual component laid out with paralyzing accuracy. Perfection was mandatory. Kael's standards were rumored to be lethal. Elara was shuffled from her scrubbing duties to the Grand Hall kitchens, where she was responsible for arranging the floral ice sculptures that would decorate the feast. Unlike scrubbing, this task required a delicate touch and steady nerves, two qualities she pretended to lack. "Keep your head down, Elara. Keep your head down," she repeated the mantra internally. The Order's acolytes feared Kael for his political power. Elara feared him for his purpose. He was the spearhead of the realm's anti-magic enforcement, the hunter of all things unauthorized, especially the legendary, catastrophic power of the Phoenix bloodline. She listened to the hushed conversations around her, gleaning details that fueled her terror. "They say his power of perception is absolute," whispered a cook, nervously slicing cold trout. "He can see a lie woven into the very air. He feels forbidden magic like a flame against his skin." "He sentenced 3 mages last month merely for practicing minor weather control outside their jurisdiction," murmured another. "His justice is cold, precise, and final." Elara felt the icy pit in her stomach deepen. Her shame under Lyra was trivial. It was a wound to her pride. Kael, however, was an existential threat. Her weakness was her shield, but if his renowned perception managed to penetrate the 7 years of carefully constructed deception, if he saw the volcanic core hidden beneath the facade of the clumsy, water-weary servant, her life would end before the sun set. As the final preparations were made, Elara was left alone to secure the Grand Hall's ceremonial entrance. Her mind raced. Stay silent, move slow, be invisible. Tomorrow, when Kael walked through those doors, every fiber of her being would be screaming danger. She just had to survive the inspection, blend into the woodwork, and ensure the Grand Inquisitor noticed the polished silver, the icy flowers, the pristine floor, anything but the desperate, terrified ghost standing beside them. The great iron doors were locked. The trap was set, though Elara was the mouse, not the bait. Chapter 2. The morning of the Inquisitor's arrival was heralded not by a bell, but by the nervous silence of 400 acolytes trying to breathe quietly. Elara was already in the Grand Hall, wiping down the vast frozen altar. She thought she had made it, hidden successfully amidst the chaos. But then Sister Lyra appeared, gliding over the pristine floor. This time, her voice carried a sickeningly sweet tone that set every nerve in Elara's body screaming. "Acolyte Elara," Lyra announced, loud enough for a cluster of higher-ranking priors to turn and listen. "You have been assigned the most crucial task of the morning. You are to cleanse and prepare the Brazier of Illumination." Elara froze, her scrubbing rag dropping into the bucket. The Brazier of Illumination. It wasn't merely decorative, it was the sacred focus of the Order, requiring a specialized cleansing ritual powered by a deep, flowing charge of purifying water magic to prepare it for the high ceremony. "Sister," Elara stammered, forcing her voice to shake with panic, I don't possess the skill. It requires strong elemental focus. I am only—" "We are short-handed," Lyra cut her off smoothly, pulling a silver vial of highly concentrated holy water from her sleeve. "And the priors agree that since you are the most physically available servant, you must perform the labor required to empty and polish the basin. You need only empty the residual water and purify the stone with this vial." Lyra's justification was a masterpiece of malice. While emptying the basin was physical labor fit for a servant, applying the purifying holy water without a corresponding elemental charge to neutralize its reactive spiritual energy would leave the brazier violently unstable. Any mage attempting to use it later would suffer a powerful feedback shock. Lyra wasn't just setting Elara up for failure. She was setting her up to sabotage the central ceremony of the Grand Inquisitor's inspection. "You have until the noon bell," Lyra stated, her eyes finally meeting Elara's with a triumphant, cold glint. "Do not disappoint the Order, Acolyte Elara." The massive carved stone felt like the weight of a collapsing glacier on her shoulders. Elara's mind raced. If she used her cover story, that she was too weak to even handle the holy water, she would be beaten and dismissed. But if she followed Lyra's directions, she would unwittingly poison the brazier, ensuring a political disaster and a charge of deliberate high treason when the Inquisitor's ceremony failed. This was not humiliation. This was an elegant, public setup for her execution. Her phoenix heart hammered against her ribs, demanding to burn this cold prison to the ground, but she fought the impulse, silently measuring the seconds until the noon bell. She was trapped. The noise of the assembling order was a low, rising tide that threatened to drown Elara in shame. She had spent the last hour desperately trying to stabilize the brazier. The moment she applied Lyra's toxic holy water, the ancient stone had begun to emit a faint, unstable hum, a sure sign of dangerous magical misalignment. Elara knew she couldn't fix it without a surge of water or ice magic. So, she did the only thing a weak servant could do. She polished the exterior stone until it gleamed, hoping sheer visual perfection would disguise the internal chaos. Just as the first high-ranking prior approached the altar, Lyra materialized beside Elara, her smile a perfect, chilling curve. "A truly remarkable polish, Elara," Lyra announced, her voice pitched perfectly to cut through the hum of the gathering crowd. "But beauty is superficial. The Grand Inquisitor does not judge our servants on elbow grease alone." "Oh dear," Lyra exclaimed, drawing the attention of the nearest priors. "The brazier is unstable. It must be charged immediately. Acolyte Elara, you worked on this. Why did you fail to provide the necessary magical foundation?" Elara kept her head bowed, her voice weak. "Sister, I told you. I lack the elemental focus. My magic is too—" "Yes, we all know your magic is feeble," Lyra interrupted, rolling her eyes for the benefit of the crowd. "But perhaps not non-existent? Prove it. The Inquisitor will expect every member of the Order, even the lowest, to possess some capacity for service." Lyra extended her hand toward the brazier and pointed a finger at the troubled stone. "Conjure us a spark. Not a strong cleansing beam, just a single, pathetic spark of water to show our guests that you are not entirely worthless. Just a tiny, shimmering demonstration of your magical existence." The air hung heavy. Lyra was demanding the impossible. Elara could conjure fire, a blazing inferno that would instantly expose her and bring Kael's swift judgment. She could not conjure a controlled spark of water, the element that fought her bloodline. To refuse would be to admit she was magically dead, a failure so profound it warranted banishment. To attempt it was to risk the phoenix escaping. As Elara stood paralyzed by the impossible demand, a deep, resonant bell tolled through the hall. The heavy silence that followed was broken only by the deliberate, measured cadence of approaching footsteps. Lyra's smile widened with absolute victory. She knew her timing was flawless. The audience was gathered, the stage was set, and the Grand Inquisitor had arrived. Elara's shame and potential downfall was now perfectly scheduled for a debut. Chapter 3. The atmosphere didn't just quiet, it seized up, becoming painfully brittle. Every acolyte and prior in the Grand Hall instantly straightened, their eyes dropping instinctively. Grand Inquisitor Kael entered like a shockwave of cold, precise authority. He was younger than Elara had expected, perhaps in his early 30s, but his presence commanded silence more effectively than any Arch-Mage's shout. His eyes were the color of glacial ice, constantly moving, constantly assessing. Power did not radiate off him in waves, but resided in his stillness, a coiled, silent force ready to strike. Kael's gaze finally locked onto the small tableau near the altar. The pristine, haughty Lyra demanding a magical demonstration from the kneeling, pathetic Elara. He paused, his expression remaining perfectly neutral, absorbing the tableau without betraying a single thought. Lyra, seeing her opportunity, seized the moment to escalate. She curtsied deeply, oozing deference. "My Lord Inquisitor," she purred, her voice loud and clear. "Please forgive this small lapse in discipline. We are merely addressing the remedial skills of acolyte Elara. She insists she is magically inert, which, while true, is a poor example for the Order. "Now, Elara," Lyra hissed, adopting a false, encouraging tone. "Show the Inquisitor that even a servant can muster the tiniest spell. Perform the sacred illumination ritual." The demand was not merely to conjure a spark now, it was to perform a specific, high-level ritual that required sustained elemental control. It was an impossible challenge. Elara was paralyzed, the choice before her searingly clear. Admit she was magically empty and accept banishment, or unleash the Phoenix and guarantee her execution. Elara could barely feel the cold flagstones beneath her, only the overwhelming, crushing weight of Kael's absolute attention. She felt like a piece of glass under a high-powered lens. Unlike Lyra's spite, Kael's observation was terrifyingly impartial. It was the focus of a scientist examining a specimen, or perhaps a hunter sighting its quarry. She knew that Kael hadn't just heard Lyra's challenge. He had already analyzed the entire dynamic, dissected Lyra's pettiness, and measured Elara's fear. In the suffocating silence, the Inquisitor raised a single, armored hand, silencing Lyra mid-breath. His eyes never left Elara. The true test was about to begin. Elara knew the only way to avoid immediate execution was to maintain the facade, even if it meant ruin. With a voice scraped raw by fear, she finally spoke, directing her words not to Lyra, but toward the floor. "My Lord Inquisitor," Elara whispered, forcing the tremor back into her tone. "I cannot accept the sacred illumination challenge. It requires true elemental focus. I am defective. I beg the Order for dismissal and banishment, rather than insult this ceremony with my failure." A ripple of low murmurs swept through the hall. Dismissal was the ultimate disgrace, but a predictable escape for the magically inert. Lyra smirked, satisfied with the public humiliation. Then Kael spoke, and the sound of his voice was like ice cracking, low, precise, and utterly irresistible. He did not address the priors or Lyra. He spoke only to Elara. "You choose the path of least resistance, acolyte Elara," Kael stated, his words cutting through the political layers of the scene. "You choose cowardice over trial. You choose guaranteed exile over the possibility of a struggle." He didn't sound angry. He sounded disappointed, a fatal judgment delivered without emotion. "You are already disgraced, acolyte," Kael continued, his glacial eyes seeming to bore directly through her fragile disguise and into the core of her hidden power. "But you do not truly wish to escape. You wish to hide, and I cannot tolerate the weak will of those who choose hiding over confronting their duty." He made the slightest gesture toward the humming brazier. "I am the Grand Inquisitor. I demand clarity. I demand truth," Kael commanded, his voice gaining a sudden magnetic resonance that settled deep in Elara's chest. "You will not run. You will accept the challenge. Perform the sacred illumination ritual." Elara's body screamed in protest. Her mind raced with the 7 years of terror, survival, and forced suppression. But something in Kael's absolute command, a power that felt dangerously close to her own, a terrifying recognition, snapped the final thread of her caution. She realized there was no escape now. She couldn't beg, she couldn't run. The Grand Inquisitor hadn't seen her fire, but he had seen her lie. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Elara rose to her feet. Her voice was still quiet, but steady now. "I accept the challenge, my Lord Inquisitor." The gasp that swept the assembly was sharp and immediate. Elara had just committed magical suicide in front of the entire Order, and the Inquisitor had personally sealed the command. The stage was set, the audience was primed, and her performance was about to reveal a power that would either save her or see her dead before sunset. Chapter 4. Elara reached the altar, placing her trembling hands upon the cold, unstable stone. Lyra watched, a confident smile of impending victory plastered on her face. The Order waited for the pathetic failure, the miserable flicker of nothing that would justify Elara's banishment. But as her fingers made contact with the brazier, the cold ceased to matter. In the space of a single breath, 7 years of pain, isolation, and calculated suffering flooded her mind. She saw again the night of ash and smoke, the crimson magic that had shattered her home, the assassin's cloaks, and the dying command of her mother, echoing fiercely, "Hide, survive, live." She had honored that command. She had lived, but she hadn't lived. She had been a ghost, enduring shame to avoid death. Standing here now, facing Kael's absolute judgment and Lyra's vicious glee, Elara realized survival wasn't enough anymore. She was not put on this earth to be a scrubbing brush and a target. With a deep, visceral shift, Elara stopped trying to suppress the truth. The phoenix, held captive for so long, screamed its way free. It was not a slow release. It was a violent, internal combustion. The cold, thin blood in her veins was instantly replaced by molten gold. The air around her shimmered and distorted as the magic that had been painstakingly crammed into a tiny corner of her soul rushed outward, reclaiming every inch of her body. The transformation was agonizing, muscles expanding, senses sharpening, a surge of raw volcanic power overwhelming her mind with its sudden, intoxicating magnitude. She felt the 7 years of pretense, the fear, the whispered apologies, the faked clumsiness burn away like dry paper. This was not the pathetic servant. This was the last child of the phoenix. Elara took the breath of a free person for the first time in years, opening her eyes. They were no longer the dull, subservient gray the Order knew. They blazed with the raw, brilliant color of liquid gold. She had chosen her true self. Now, the world would have to reckon with the consequences. The Order waited for the weak, dying sputter of water magic. Instead, what erupted from the brazier was a silent, incandescent pillar of pure golden fire. It was not the chaotic, destructive fire of common mages. This was the sacred, controlled blaze of the phoenix bloodline, so hot it didn't generate smoke, only light. The pillar of fire shot toward the high, cold ceiling, instantly vaporizing the ice on the rafters and filling the grand hall with a blinding, terrifying warmth. Elara stood at the center of the phenomenon, bathed in the golden light. Her appearance had changed. The simple tunic now looked less like cloth and more like a vessel for the light, and her suppressed posture was replaced by the effortless, intimidating straightness of a true elemental master. She was magnificent, radiating a forgotten, primal power that made every mage in the hall feel instantly small. The first to react was Sister Lyra. Her powerful water magic felt like a child's toy next to this elemental force. Lyra didn't choose to submit. Her body chose for her. She dropped to her knees, eyes wide with the chilling realization that she hadn't been mocking a pathetic servant, but the last surviving legend of a mythical bloodline. Around the hall, the same wave of involuntary submission swept the priors and acolytes. Low-ranking mages fell completely to the floor. Even the higher ranks lowered their gaze, unable to meet the intensity of the phoenix. And then there was Kael. The Grand Inquisitor did not flinch, did not cower, did not drop his eyes. He remained standing, his posture rigid and unyielding, his glacial eyes locked onto the pillar of fire and the woman who commanded it. The shock on his face lasted only a fraction of a second before it was replaced by something profound: recognition. And in that instant, as Elara's magnificent blazing power roared into the frozen air, she felt it, a connection snapping into place with the force of destiny. It wasn't the terror of the hunt, it was the magnetic certainty of two elemental poles aligning. The binding of souls. The forbidden power had not only saved her from execution, but had simultaneously revealed her most dangerous truth and delivered her most potent fate. Her mate, the one ordained by magic to stand as her equal, was the very man who hunted her kind. Elara had stopped hiding, and the world, and the Grand Inquisitor, would never be the same. Chapter 5. The binding was not merely recognition. It was a sudden, violent completion. It slammed into Elara's consciousness with the force of an elemental convergence, a terrifying, exhilarating certainty that the Grand Inquisitor was hers and she was his. The connection was a humming cable of fire and ice, demanding proximity and allegiance, overriding 7 years of survival instinct in an instant. Kael was the first to move. The shock of the binding had left him rigid for only a heartbeat, but now his control snapped back, sharper and colder than before. His eyes, still fixed on Elara, narrowed not in judgment, but in a sudden, fierce possessiveness. He didn't speak to the kneeling crowd. He spoke to the air, his voice carrying an undeniable power that bypassed conscious thought and commanded obedience. "The ceremony is concluded. The brazier is cleansed," Kael's voice resonated, cold and absolute. "Every member of the Order will immediately vacate the Grand Hall and retire to your quarters. Do not speak of what you have witnessed here. Do not look upon the Arch-Mage." The term Arch-Mage was a seismic shock. It designated the legendary leader of the magical territories, a title thought lost. The Order members, terrified of both the raw Phoenix power and the Inquisitor's lethal command, scrambled to obey, shuffling out with painful haste. "You are an idiot," Kael muttered, his voice low and for her ears alone. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation delivered with furious intensity. 7 years, you let yourself be tormented, hiding a power that could change the fate of the realm. And you reveal it now in a political pit because a child pushed you. Elara could barely speak, reeling from the force of the bond. You commanded it." Kael ignored the defense. He took a heavy, ceremonial cloak from the altar and roughly draped it over Elara's shoulders, shielding her from any lingering sight. "We speak privately now." It was not a request. It was the command of a Grand Inquisitor and the first claim of a mate. Elara found herself following him, the overwhelming force of the binding of souls guiding her steps. She felt the terrifying, magnetic pull of their shared destiny, knowing that the next few minutes would decide whether this man, her mate, would choose to protect the Phoenix Queen or execute the forbidden mage. The small room felt instantly charged, the heat of the Phoenix power meeting the cold authority of the Inquisitor. Kael did not move to touch her. He moved to confront her. 7 years, Kael repeated, his voice low, controlled and dangerous, the sound vibrating with the force of the binding. 7 years you existed in my territory, suffering humiliation, letting that venomous acolyte use you as a political tool, all while you housed a power that could have ended your suffering and helped me bring stability to this entire sector. His eyes were furious. You chose to live as the weakest soul in the Order. You chose daily abuse over the slightest risk of revelation. I have been searching for my fated Arch-Mage, and she was here, kneeling on my floors, letting herself be mocked. Elara stepped forward, her own temper flaring. The phoenix in her blood refused to be shamed. "I chose survival. You speak of shame, but you have no idea what it is to be hunted. My entire family, the last of the Phoenix bloodline, was annihilated by assassins who feared our power. I was 16. My only duty was to hide." "Being who I am means immediate execution, Inquisitor," she shot back, her golden eyes blazing. "If I had revealed this fire 7 years ago, I would have died an anonymous corpse in a hidden alley. I am not ashamed that I chose life over a proud death." Kael's rigid posture eased slightly. He saw the genuine, terrified child in the magnificent mage before him. "I am not angry that you survived, Elara," he conceded, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I am furious that you had to, that my territory, that I, failed to protect you enough that hiding became your only viable solution." He reached out, his gloved fingers brushing the bare skin of her arm. The surge of the binding was overwhelming, a shared memory of ancient oaths and destined paths. "I am the Grand Inquisitor, dedicated to stability," Kael stated. You are the Phoenix Arch-Mage, destined to restore balance. Together, we are an unstoppable force. But now that you are revealed, you have drawn the fire of every political enemy and every assassin who thought your bloodline was dead. Elara felt the shift, the anger replaced by urgent protective necessity. You understand, then? You see the cost of this bond. I see that my most precious charge is also my mate, Kael murmured, his breath warm on her face. You hid for 7 years, and in doing so, you survived to become my queen. I waited for you, and now that you are here, I will stand between you and the entire world. The battle was over. The lie was exposed, the bond confirmed, and the shared war had just begun. Chapter 6. When Elara and Kael returned, the air was irrevocably changed. They walked side by side, no longer an inquisitor and a servant, but two complementary forces. The binding of souls was an invisible pressure that connected them, a powerful magnetic field that was instantly palpable to every mage present. Elara no longer shuffled. She moved with the confident stride of a phoenix. Kael, for the first time, looked less like a judge and more like a guard. He brought the assembly to attention with a sharp, curt motion of his hand. His gaze swept the crowd, lingering only briefly on Lyra, who was standing stiffly to the side, her face pale with dread. "I have reached my judgment," Kael announced, his voice devoid of his earlier clinical neutrality, now infused with protective authority. Acolyte Elara's actions this morning were not born of recklessness, but of necessity. She has spent 7 years hiding, a desperate measure that allowed her to survive the annihilation of her family. But the time for hiding is over, he continued, his voice ringing with finality. Elara has revealed her true nature not as a common mage, but as the last descendant of the most powerful bloodline known to our realm. He paused for dramatic effect, ensuring the weight of the moment settled on every fearful face. She is not a servant. She is not an acolyte. By the divine law of elemental destiny, and by the decree of the Grand Inquisitor, I name her my fated Arch-Mage, the rightful queen of the Phoenix bloodline, and my partner in power. The priors stared in stunned silence. The idea of the pathetic cleaning servant being crowned a legendary Arch-Mage was a political and religious upheaval. But no one dared to challenge Kael's decree. His word was law, and the visible power of the Phoenix Mage standing beside him was undeniable proof. Lyra's control finally broke. Her lips parted in a silent, terrified scream as she realized the full, terrible scale of her mistake. She hadn't just bullied a servant. She had unknowingly tormented her future queen and brought the hammer of the Inquisitor's claim down upon herself. The fear of retribution, immediate and devastating, was written plainly across her features. Kael turned his attention fully to Elara, offering her the stage. The Order awaits the judgment of their new Arch-Mage. Elara stepped forward, her golden eyes meeting the fearful gaze of the woman who had made her life a daily hell. She had the power of vengeance now, but the Arch-Mage had something far more valuable to deliver. Elara paused, letting the weight of her new power settle over the subservient Lyra. For 7 years, that woman had represented everything Elara feared, the cruel, casual abuse of institutional authority. Now, Lyra was nothing but a figure of abject, defeated terror. Elara's voice, when she spoke, was clear and resonant, carrying the subtle, commanding force of her true lineage. It was the voice of a ruler, tempered by experience. "Sister Lyra," Elara began, her tone measured, devoid of the emotion Lyra had so often sought to provoke. "You were relentlessly cruel to me. You ridiculed my weakness, you mocked my fear, and you pushed me to the edge of ruin this morning. But your cruelty taught me something invaluable," Elara continued. 7 years of enduring your contempt taught me patience, resilience, and the absolute necessity of invisibility. In a perverse way, your abuse guaranteed my survival." The logic of her forgiveness was as sharp and unexpected as Kael's blade. It stunned the onlookers. Therefore I will not punish you for the past, Elara decreed, her gaze unwavering. Consider your past behavior towards me forgiven. The clemency was a grace Lyra didn't deserve, but the lesson was far from over. Elara's voice hardened slightly, imbued with the authority of the Grand Inquisitor's claim. However, if you or any other member of this order ever use your rank or elemental strength to abuse, humiliate, or deliberately endanger a wolf, a servant, or any soul you perceive as weaker than yourself again, Elara warned, allowing her eyes to flash a moment of terrifying, pure gold. I will not forget this moment, and the full power of the Phoenix bloodline will ensure the swift and painful dismantling of your position. Lyra, weeping silently in terror and relief, bowed her head deeper, pressing her face against the cold stone. Yes, my Arch-Mage, I understand, and I apologize for my grievous conduct. Elara looked out over the assembly, now fully in control. True strength, she stated, speaking to the entire order, is not measured by how easily you can dominate those beneath you. It is measured by how fiercely you stand to protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is the rule of the Phoenix bloodline. And that is the law of the new Arch-Mage. The assembly responded with stunned, respectful bows, acknowledging the authority of their new queen, a woman who had risen from scrubbing floors to commanding the very element they feared, choosing mercy over vengeance and setting the stage for a revolution. The epilogue. 6 months had passed since the Grand Hall fire. 6 months since the servant acolyte Elara had burned away her disguise and claimed her destiny. The Order of the Serene Glacier was still struggling to adapt to the new reality. Water mages now had to study fire theory, and no one, especially Sister Lyra, who had been quietly reassigned to a remote, freezing outpost, stripped of her rank, dared to misuse their authority. The atmosphere was no longer one of chilling rigidity, but of disciplined, cautious respect. Elara, now formally installed as the Arch-Mage, was seated at a massive, newly carved obsidian desk. She ran a weary but satisfied hand across a parchment. Kael stood beside her, his posture relaxed only in her presence, discussing the politics of the Eastern Barons who were already testing their new regime. The Barons sent envoys questioning the stability of a fire queen in an ice territory, Kael murmured, his focus purely strategic. I suggested they send stronger envoys if they wished to test the binding of souls. Elara smiled, a genuine, strong expression the servant acolyte could never have mustered. The shared authority was seamless, the terrifying force of the binding having settled into the comforting, absolute certainty of partnership. They were Arch-Mage and Grand Inquisitor, 2 sides of a coin, one ruling with elemental law, the other with steel and political might. Elara's gaze drifted to the window, watching the swirling snow outside. She was no longer afraid of the cold. The 7 years of hiding felt like a lifetime ago, a strange, necessary nightmare. The phoenix in her blood, once a terrified secret, was now a source of steady, warm power. She reflected on the agonizing choice she had made that day at the Brazier. Hiding had kept her alive, but it had starved her soul. Revealing her true self had instantly painted a target on her back. The original assassins who murdered her family had already sent feelers, sensing the rise of the phoenix. But this time, she wouldn't be hiding. She stood tall, a queen forged in fear but annealed by fire, with the strongest man in the realm standing at her side. Let the assassins come, Kael, Elara said, her voice carrying a deep, final sense of purpose. Let the barons plot. They wanted to see the weakest of the order humiliated and banished. Instead, they forced the phoenix to rise. She looked out over the vast, white kingdom, no longer a servant, but a ruler ready for war. I will not apologize for surviving, but I will no longer apologize for being exactly who I was born to be.